A calculator is a tool used to perform arithmetic calculations of varying complexity. While it may not seem like much, the calculator, as well as the materials within it, have a very long history that dates back all the way to the Big Bang. To learn more about this invention, we must turn back time to the start of space, time, and energy as we know it. First, there was the Big Bang. We don't know what caused it, but it created space, time, and energy. Due to the principle of mass-energy equivalence and the small difference in the ratio between matter and antimatter, eventually, atoms began to appear as the universe cooled down. It was mostly helium and hydrogen. The formation and the eventual destruction of stars was key to producing the other elements necessary for the formation of the calculator. The density of the atoms produced wasn't completely uniform. Some regions were more dense, and gravity attracted atoms unevenly because of this, and magnified those differences. At the center of the areas with higher density, the temperature increased. Violently, gravity shrunk and compressed all of the atoms even more, until it hit 10 million degrees. In the core of these dense areas, protons, after being released from the atoms, fused together and then released a tremendous amount of energy that would push outwards to prevent gravity from compressing it further. Stars had been formed. Within these stars, higher temperatures were needed to fuse other elements after running out of their current fuel. When the stars ran out of helium fuel, they would compress because there would not be enough energy to counter gravity. Temperatures would get much hotter, and fusion would start again, preventing gravity from crushing the star. This would repeat until iron, when stars cannot fuse iron anymore. There would be no more energy left to counter gravity. Most of the time, the elements floated off into space peacefully when they ran out of fuel. However, that only produced the elements up to iron. The other elements came from gigantic stars that collapse in something we call a supernova, a massive explosion due to gravity compressing all of the elements together faster than the speed of light. The temperatures were super high and created the other elements. This process still continues today. A calculator is made up of a plastic frame, rubber, and a liquid crystal display made of glass. Some materials in a calculator, such as rubber, which is made up of carbon, can be fused without a supernova. Silicon dioxide is a material in glass, and silicon is the last stage of fusion before iron. Sodium, another element in glass, cannot be fused, and therefore comes from a supernova. With plastic, multiple elements are created with fusion, whereas chlorine and sulfur must be created in a supernova. The materials that were created in these supernovae, along with the atoms floating in space, were the materials that eventually created the Earth and the Sun. Most of the material, over 99% of it, went into the Sun, whereas all of the planets formed, with the remaining 0.1%. The gassy material was driven away by heat towards the outer planets, such as Jupiter and Saturn. The inner rocky material collided and formed the inner planets, which then collided to form the Moon. Rocky planets work very well for chemistry, and because of a bit of luck and the right conditions, life formed. This life evolved on our planet and diversified. It was one of the prerequisites for plastic, a material that is within our calculators. Plastics are made from refined crude oil and natural gas, which comes from life and dead plankton millions of years ago. Eventually, we evolved and became the first known species to discover math. Math was not developed or discovered until around 2700 BCE with the ancient Egyptians. Before then, calculators and other tools were not needed. However, as math spread, soon a tool called the abacus was invented. The abacus was not a calculator in the way that we think of one today, but rather a counting board to keep track of calculations that one made in the head. Technology was rather stagnant until the 17th century during the scientific revolution. The first mechanical calculator was invented by the mathematical genius Blaise Pascal in 1642 due to his father being a tax collector. A few years later, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who had co-invented calculus, built a four-function calculator. The impact on engineering, science, and mathematics by these inventions were profound. These calculators over time were miniaturized, made less complex, and made more reliable by using different mechanisms and technology. It was this way until the development of the first microprocessors and electronic calculators. These calculators used processing chips similar to the ones you would find in a modern computer, except much less efficient and powerful. The Intel 4004 was the first commercially available microprocessor, which kicked off the digital revolution. Soon the Intel 8008 was released, and then the 8080 and the 8086. Texas Instruments then created its own microprocessor design, as well as IBM for its own personal computers a decade later. HP soon developed its own calculator design called the HP 35. It was the first handheld scientific calculator developed. In the 1980s, Texas Instruments and HP produced calculators of varying complexity and processing power. The HP 28C, introduced in 1987, was both the first graphing calculator made by HP and also their first calculator to allow integration and differentiation. However, since then, calculators have gradually been replaced by other forms of generalized processing power, such as personal computers and smartphones, going from 41% market share of compute capacity all the way down to almost a non-existent percentage. It may be possible that one day, calculators as we know them may be phased out entirely and replaced by more modern interfaces with higher processing power and capabilities.